So I've just finished watching that Netflix series on Ed Gein, and it got me wondering if there are any characters in the Warhammer 40k universe who share that same disturbing energy. And after thinking about it, I landed on Lucius the Eternal. Now, I wanted to make a video with more of a Halloween vibe, something fun and nerdy, but also a little bit gory. So this one is going to be a mix of lore, a touch of horror, and also a lot of bloody weird. Now, he is one of the Emperor's children's crew, we're going with crew. He's a champion of Slaanesh, you know, the chaos god that's all about excess and, well, obsession. Now, he's picked up a few nicknames along the way. People call him the Soul Thief, Fulgrim's champion, even the scion of Chemos, and that's just basically the planet that he came from. But he's infamous, and he's not the kind of bloke that you want to just casually bump into it in you know, Aldi. Now, Ed Gein was famous for taking people apart, making grotesque trophies of them, and, like, you know, we had lampshades and clothes and masks, you name it, he probably made it. Now, Lucius, he does the same sort of thing, but just in the grimdark 40k way. He is obsessed with pain and suffering and turning battle into this twisted kind of art. Every time he kills someone, their soul gets trapped inside his body, their screaming face literally bubbling up through his armour. It's like wearing his victims as part of his own skin forever. So where Gein stitched together bits of his victims in his farmhouse, Lucius is like the walking catwalk collection. His very being is made out of the peoples that he destroyed. He doesn't just kill you, he makes you part of him permanently. So let's talk about him. So if we look at a young itty-bitty baby Lucius, now he grew up on a dreary planet called Chemos. Not exactly the Shire, it's more like Mordor, but with way worse neighbours. And from early on, he had this knack for sort of picking up any skill ridiculously fast. Proper, like, that annoying kid at school who's always just good at everything vibes. Now, naturally, the local posh crowd, they took notice, and Lucius leaned straight into the art of war, as you do. Mainly sword fighting because, well, why not? Think of him as that kid who, instead of learning the recorder, just went full-on Geralt of Rivia with a blade. But here's where it gets creepy. Now, much like Ed Gein had those early sort of warning signs, you know, the dodgy childhood, the obsession with everything that's just not normal. And let's be honest, not the best role models. Lucius started showing a sadistic streak really early doors. He'd kill people he swore were bandits or beggars who attacked him first. A bit like when Anakin says they started it after wiping out an entire Tusken camp. Anyway, I digress. And then when he tried to teach swordsmanship, didn't go down so well. His lessons, they usually ended with his students missing a finger or an eye, or at the very least a few scars. Imagine if Obi-Wan trained Luke but just kept accidentally stabbing him. That was Lucius's idea of a seminar. Now, then came this big annual sword fighting contest on Chemos. Now, Lucius is still like a skinny teenager at this point, but he duels a veteran champion twice his age. He takes this nasty stab to the gut, but in true horror movie fashion, shrugs it off and then calmly takes the guy apart piece by piece. Very like Leather Apron in the shed kind of energy, just with swords. And just when the crowd of angry disciples were like about to jump him, out of the shadow steps this towering armoured figure, a sergeant of the Emperor's children. And he basically says, "Mate, you're wasted here. Do you want to come with me?" And that's kind of how he got scooped into the Emperor's Children Legion. So if Ed Gein grew up sort of like turning his trauma into these really weird crafts, Lucius channeled his into the grim art of duelling and carving people up, not in a farmhouse, but on the battlefield. So then if we fast forward to the Great Crusade, and Lucius has leveled up like big time at this point. He's now captain of the 13th Company of the Emperor's Children. It's a proper high rank, and it's not bad for a lad who kind of started out dueling villagers back on Chemos. But at this point, his skill with a blade had gone like full legend status. Other Marines looked at him like I said, like Geralt of Rivia of swordplay, only with way less brooding charm and way more smugness. But here's the thing that kind of like, while everyone knew he was deadly, they also thought that he was proud and reckless and frankly just a bit of a child. Even his closest mate kind of kept him at arm's length, like the classic, "I like you, but you're also kind of one bad day away from going full-blown Anakin, so hang back a little bit, that kind of friend. And here's where the Ed Gein comparison, I think, at this point still lingers. Gein was obviously known in his small town as the odd but harmless type, and people thought he was kind of socially awkward, maybe even a bit childish, but nothing more sinister than that, until they obviously found his decor in his farmhouse. Now, Lucius gave off the same vibe in the Legion. He could come across as immature, even a bit daft, but bubbling underneath was something much, much darker. Now, dueling, that was his obsession. Lucius was never bested with a blade. The one and only time he lost was against Garviel Loken of the Lunar Wolves. And I don't know why I'm pointing like that. That's the fact there. And even then, Loken didn't beat him with a sword. He clocked him in the jaw with a good old-fashioned, helm hammer hand. But basically the Warhammer version of, Indiana Jones shooting the swordsman in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Flashy blade work meets a simple right hook. Now, naturally, Lucius couldn't let that stand. So in the rematch, he came back and then he got his revenge. Now, to top it all off, when Lucius went into battle, he didn't just grab any weapon. No. He used this ornate antique sword. Sword. And it was forged way back in the smithies of the Orals by the Terawatt clan. This was during the Unification Wars. Proper museum relic, essentially. If you imagine Ed Gein not just making things out of bones, but deciding to commit his murders whilst cosplaying with some medieval heirloom that he found in the attic, Lucius loved the drama, very much style over sanity. After the betrayal of Isstvan III, Lucius found himself fighting alongside Saul Tarvitz and the other loyal emperor's children, and for a time he stood with them. But as the battle raged, it became clear that Tarvitz was the true hero of the hour, the one that the loyalists were rallying behind. And for Lucius, whose pride at this point is already sort of bigger than his sense of humour, that was unbearable. Jealousy starts to eat away at him, just as Ed Gein's life was twisted by obsession and resentment, unable to handle being overshadowed or ignored. Lucius kind of couldn't stand being in someone else's shadow. His hunger for glory, it finally snapped what little loyalty that he had left. So I think we know where this is going. He betrayed them. He turned his blade on 30 of his own men, loyal Marines who trusted him. And he didn't stop there. Now, when Captain Solomon Demeter arrived, Lucius called out for help, pretending that the Marines he was slaughtering were traitors. Demeter rushed in, and then only to realise the truth when it was already too late and the 30 were dead. And then the two, they clash, right? Now, though Demeter was already wounded, it was still a pretty brutal fight. In the end, Lucius did kill him, cutting down a brother in arms, not out of necessity, but pride, envy, twisted thrill of proving himself, who knows? And then, like Gein, kind of surrounding himself with the remains of those he betrayed and those he destroyed, Lucius left behind a battlefield of corpses that day, all to just feed his own vanity. So after the selling out of the loyalists on Isstvan, you'd think that Lucius might have been shunned, but no. Turns out treachery and skill with a blade make you quite the catch in the Emperor's children. So his combat chops, they got noticed. And before long, he's gone from this backstabber to Lord Commander, leading Fulgrim's own bodyguard of assault marines. I mean, talk about failing upwards. The thing is, Lucius, he wasn't all swagger and swords. He actually started having these dreams, the proper unsettling sort. And he got it in his head that Fulgrim, his beloved Primarch, wasn't quite himself. Now, it turns out he was right. Fulgrim had been possessed. So Lucius does what I guess Lucius always does, and he makes it dramatic. He ropes in the likes of Fabius Bile, and with others, they actually capture their own Primarch. If you imagine the scene, the top-ranking officers trying to tie down a demigod because they reckon he's gone a bit like the Exorcist. They try torture, They try exorcism, but none of it works. Now, eventually, Lucius, he does realise that Fulgrim had already kicked the demon out himself. It's a bit awkward, really, kind of like staging an intervention only to find out that your mate already quit drinking last month, and then you've got that really weird moment. But still, Lucius stays loyal to Fulgrim after that, following him on this grand quest for the angel exterminators. Now, along the way, he runs into Nicona Sharrowkyn of the Raven Guard. First fight, Lucius gets a nice new scar across his cheek. Second fight, Sharrowkyn shows him how it's done, gives him a matching scar on the other side, and then finishes him properly, driving 2 blades through Lucius's hearts. That's right, plural, 2 hearts. It's the perks of being a space marine. But it didn't help him much that day. And just like that, Lucius dies. You'd think that would be the end of him, but not Lucius. He wakes up later in Fabius Bar's Apothecarion, very much alive and apparently more impressed with himself than confused. Old Lucius could take dying as a chance to, brag about. So after getting skewered, Lucius goes wandering off like a moody teenager who just rage quit again. He's still obsessed with proving himself, especially after Sharrowkyn embarrassed him. So instead of cooling off, he goes hunting for his next worthy challenge. It's classic Lucius at this point. His whole life is just one long queue for the next duel. And he bumps into Hathor Mutt of the Thousand Sons and just instantly can't stand him. Why? Because Mutt is basically what Lucius used to be. He's sharp, he's cocky, and he's dripping with potential. And it's that mirror effect, like when Ed Gein looked at people who had normal, stable lives and he burned with resentment. Lucius couldn't stand seeing a younger version of himself in someone else. So naturally, he needed to tear that down. Now, Matt mentions Sanact, which is the Thousand Sons' big-name duelist, living in a tower on the planet of sorcerers. Not only that, but none of the Legion's psychic seers could ever predict Sanact losing a fight. For Lucius, that was bloody irresistible. It's the same sort of obsession that Gein had with the things his mother told him were untouchable, that the more forbidden or impossible it seemed, the more he had to go after it. So Lucius, he treks all the way to Sanact's tower, and when he gets there, Sanact welcomes him in. Cool as anything, he asks Lucius if he's eager to die. And Lucius, ever the drama king, replies, "I've already done it once." And the duel kicks off. Now, Sanact is already a step ahead. He's always a step ahead. He even has the check to give Lucius pointers on technique mid-fight, like he's coaching him. Lucius, of course, refuses to accept the help. Pride and obsession will never let him. And eventually, through sheer fury, tips the balance, and Lucius disarms Sanact. He's seconds away from victory. He's about to land the killing blow when Ahriman steps in. He throws up a psychic barrier and flat out tells Lucius he needs Sanact alive. Imagine training all season for the cup final and the ref blows the whistle just before you score that winning goal. Lucius must have been absolutely seething. So he then just tags along with Ahriman's lot, but only so he can bide his time and wait for another shot at Sanact. Along the way, he duels Yasu Nagasena, who's like a skilled but like an augmented swordsman, and wins, casually tossing the poor man off a causeway, and Nagasena somehow survives, which is a bit of a dent in Lucius's reputation. But here's where it kind of really turns into a horror film. And then one of the reasons why I did go with this one. Now, he falls under the sway of a demon inside the iron oculus. It guides him and even manipulates Mutt into rewriting parts of the Book of Magnus. And eventually the whole group, they end up trapped in a crystal labyrinth. Inside, Lucius faces visions of every rival who's ever beaten him. We've got Sanact, Llama, Sharrowkyn. He defeats them all this time. But then comes the real gut punch. He sees a reflection of his old, corrupted self. And that's the one thing that he just cannot face. Just like Gein couldn't cope with the idea of his normal self outside of his mother's suffocating grip, Lucius can't deal with the man he used to be before pride and cruelty consumed him. He loses control, and in the end, the labyrinth, it swallows him whole. It's the same story, but in a different skin. Gein was literally swallowed by the grotesque world he built around himself, and Lucius, quite literally, is consumed by the horrors of what he's become. Once the Emperor's children fully gave themselves over to Slaanesh, things got even darker. Fulgrim started running these gladiatorial games on their new homeworld, basically like blood sport festivals to scratch the itch when they didn't have fresh planets to butcher. And Lucius, he was the golden boy of the arena. He was undefeated, an unstoppable dueling machine. That is until he crossblades with Lord Commander Sirius, and for the first time in ages, Lucius lost, like properly lost, and was killed in the arena. But there's a twist. In true Chaos fashion, his death wasn't the end. The sheer intensity of the fight, the rush of dying, was so intoxicating that Slaanesh herself noticed. This wasn't just a marine dying. This was a symphony of pain and also pleasure, so pure that a god decided it could not be allowed to fade. So a few days later, Sirius starts changing. His skin cracks, his hair falls out, and before long, there is literally nothing left of him but this screaming face. It's twisted into the very armour that Lucius wore, and Lucius himself is back on his feet, strutting about like he never left. It's the birth of his infamous curse. Now, here's where the Gein comparison goes into overdrive for me. Gein surrounded himself with the remains of those that he took apart, literally wearing their memory in twisted creations. Lucius is the same, only dialed up to like cosmic horror levels. Every time someone kills him, if they feel even a flicker of pride or satisfaction or grim enjoyment, they start to become him. Their face, their soul, their very being gets swallowed up and added to the writhing, screaming mass on his armour. He doesn't just remember his victims, he wears them forever. Even the bloody Necrons, the soulless machines that they aren't immune. If they kill him and take the tiniest shred of satisfaction in it, they become part of him too. It's why Lucius is so terrifying. He can never truly be killed. Every death just feeds him. Every victor just becomes another grotesque trophy stitched into his being. It's like Ed Gein's farmhouse, only instead of lampshades and masks, Lucius is the walking collection, carrying the eternal screams of his victims with him wherever he goes. Now, after the Battle of Thessaly, Fulgrim abandoned the Legion, sloping off to his demon world. Most of the Emperor's children saw it as a rejection. Not Lucius. He stayed loyal. There's still Fulgrim's champion. Even as the Legion tore itself apart in rivalries and wars, he clashed with Fabius Bile and countless others, and eventually reduced to leading a smaller warband called the Chorus Nassike. Now, even then, his infamy, it never dimmed among Chaos followers. His name still carried weight because everyone knew the curse. Everyone knew that killing Lucius meant risking becoming Lucius. And in one of the more, I think, bizarre or weird jobs, Fulgrim even tasked Lucius with hunting down and killing a clone of himself that Fabius had cooked up, which, if you think about it, is like peak Chaos nonsense. The eternal duelist, covered in the screaming faces of his victims, sent out to murder a knockoff copy of his own godlike boss. You couldn't make it up at this point. Over the millennia, Lucius, he just kept doing what he does best, basically chasing down anyone with a blade and a reputation. He carved through champions across the galaxy, the Emperor's champion of the Black Templars, the Dark Eldar. The list goes on, right? If there was a duelist worth bragging about, the chances are Lucius went out of his way to kill them and then strut about like he'd just won the FA Cup single-handedly. But time isn't kind, even to Chaos Marines. After a series of brutal setbacks, his once proud warband was whittled down to about 20 sorry-looking Marines. He had to swallow his pride and team up with Fabius Bile, the same bloke who splices things together like Dr. Frankenstein over time. With Fabius's help, Lucius built his numbers back up, merging into a much bigger force called the Faultless. From there, he slotted into Eidolon's Phoenix Conclave, still clinging to that title of Fulgrim's champion like a badge of honour. Now, he pops up again, and again, front and centre in some of Chaos's biggest moments. For example, during Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, Lucius led the Emperor's Children forces into a campaign of sheer misery. Later, he turned up in the Spear Tip Alliance, a motley mix of Chaos and Xenos smashing their way through Medusa 5th. And then wherever there's carnage, Lucius isn't far behind, grinning under the armour of screaming faces. Now, things just basically continue to get darker still. Lucius is still rampaging with the Faultless, still fighting, still dueling, but the curse has kind of worn him down. He's died so many times now, he's lost count. There are gaps in his memory where whole lives should be. Every time he comes back, there's just a little less stable. He's a little less sane. The gift from Slaanesh that made him immortal has kind of curdled into this curse. And here's where sort of the Ed Gein echo comes full circle. Gein was trapped by the grotesque world that he built, his farmhouse of horrors swallowing his life until he was just a mere ghost than he was a man. Lucius, I think, is the same. I think each death is proof that someone bested him. And because of the curse, he can never go back and face them again. He can never settle the score. Every resurrection is like a fresh reminder that he's not the invincible duelist he claims to be, just a hollow vessel of arrogance and screaming memories. In the end, Lucius isn't remembered as a warrior or a leader or even Fulgrim's champion. He's remembered as a walking nightmare, a man so consumed by obsession and pride and cruelty that even death can't spit him out. A soul thief forever, just trapped in the skin he stitched together, just like Gein, only on a galactic, God-touched scale. I think before we end this video, I do just want to talk briefly about his appearance, the scars on his face. Most of them are self-inflicted. Once upon a time, he was actually, I believe, quite handsome. The sort of bloke who could have been sculpted for a recruitment poster, but being called too pretty by his fellow Marines drove him mad with resentment. He wanted to be feared, not admired. Now, the first real crack came in that sparring match that we mentioned with Garviel Llama of the Lunar Wolves. Llama didn't even beat him with a sword. He literally broke his nose with a punch, and that was it. No matter how many apothecaries sort of tried to fix it, the nose never healed right, and that imperfection really haunted him. Later, before he ran into Serena de Angelis, this painter travelling the 28th expedition who'd already dipped her brush in chaos, so to speak, she carved 2 scars across his cheeks to remind him of Llama's insult to his perfection. And from there, Lucius took the knife to himself. Every victory, every duel, he marked his own skin until his once perfect features were buried under the intricate map of his scars. His face became a canvas of cruelty, much like Ed Gein's farmhouse, just warped, broken beauty turned into something grotesque and just inescapable. And the weapons he carried are just as twisted as his reflection. His signature tool is the Lash of Torment. It's like a demon-infested whip that screams as it bites. His sword, the Blade of the Lair, is like a relic soaked in corruption, one from an alien foe. And before that, he didn't even care about weapons. He treated them almost carelessly. His old blade was simply called 19, like it was just another number. Then there's his armour, the Armour of Shrieking Souls, powered by the thousands he's killed. Their faces writhe across it in eternal torment. And then this isn't like, it's not just for show. He can unleash their screams as a weapon, flattening foes just with the raw agony of the damned. He's even got a rack of combat stims strapped to his back, crafted by the Dark Eldar. Won it in gladiatorial pits, of course. And in the middle of a fight, the rack pumps him full of combat drugs like some twisted slot machine of violence. But obviously whenever he dies, and he does die often, he sometimes comes back without his gear, so no matter how many times it happens, somehow his weapons always find their way back to him. It's kind of like they're cursed just as much as he is. They're tied to his fate too. The sword, the whip, the armour of screaming souls, they're part of him. The way Gein's creations were part of his world, except in Lucius's case, they're not just trophies. They're alive, and they never sort of let him go. Now, this wasn't the easiest character to research. He isn't well liked in the community. I've read a lot of negative comments about him. There's also a lot of back and forth in the lore. I really struggled to kind of keep up with it, particularly about his first death. His codex entries, from what I found, they're pretty clear. It was Lord Commander Sirius who killed him in the gladiatorial pits, and that's when Slaanesh took notice, starting the whole resurrection curse. That seemed pretty set in stone. But then you've got the novel, which I read, Angel Exterminatus, where Lucius gets killed earlier by Sharrowkyn and then later wakes up on one of Fabius Bile's operating tables. And the difference is that Sharrowkyn never felt a shred of satisfaction about it. Killing Lucius didn't give him pride, pleasure, or even relief. It was just necessity, all because Lucius's curse only triggers when his killer enjoys the victory. Now, that death didn't count, which I think is why Sirius is usually listed as the official first. He was the first to take Lucius's life and take a grim delight in it, which is the sparks that Slaanesh was waiting for, I think. It's a twisted detail, really. Lucius can't just die and stay dead. His survival depends on something as small as like a flicker of pride or satisfaction in his killer. It's like Ed Gein's obsession with making use of every victim, turning them into something that could never be forgotten. With Lucius, the memory of victory literally consumes the victor, pulling them into him. He's not just keeping trophies, he is the trophy. I'm going to go on a slight rant here, but I have been reading up on this for a couple of weeks now. From what I can tell, the trouble with Lucius isn't really Lucius at all. It's how the Emperor's Children have been written over the years. Please comment if this is something you're familiar with, because I am just getting to grips with it. But there's this big gap between the older background lore and then what the Black Library novels actually did with them. I think in the early days, the Emperor's Children were painted as like proud and vain, but not without reason. They were smaller in number than some of the other legions, but their skill was meant to make up for it. They genuinely earned their arrogance. They even saved the Emperor's life during the Proximum betrayal, which is why they alone were allowed to wear the Palatina Keeler. Now, Fulgrim himself wasn't just flash. He was lethal, a duellist who could put even Primarchs like Guilliman on their backs. And Lucius was already scary good with a blade before Slaanesh ever touched him. But then when the novels started coming out, that image, it kind of got chipped away, particularly Dan Abnett's introduction of the Legion in Horus Rising. It makes them kind of look like, well, they look a little bit dumb, with Tarvitz standing out as like the only competent one. It's why at the beginning I said that he presents as somewhat childish. Then Lucius, the supposed prodigy, he gets humiliated by Garviel Loken because he didn't expect a punch, and it's just a punch. It's the sort of thing you'd see coming in your first sparring class. Never mind as a master swordsman like Geralt, like it doesn't make any sense. It carries on with Fulgrim too. I found that in the older material, Fulgrim beating Ferrus was proof of how dangerous he was. But then in the Black Library version, it takes that away and suddenly Fulgrim loses, Ferrus relents, and then the Demon Blade does the dirty work, and Fulgrim's skills get kind of swept aside. So that story, it doesn't make the loyalists look bad. And then it feels like, I'm going to keep going at this point, it kind of feels like how the Emperor's children are treated in general. Like other traitors don't get that kind of undercutting. Khan dies and comes back, but nobody downplays him, do they? Like as a berserker. Angron, Moltarion, Abaddon, even when they take a hit, they stay imposing. But the Emperor's children, they end up portrayed as like somewhat incompetent and a little more than like a caricature at some points, which I don't think does them justice. And that kind of brings us back to Lucius. On paper, he should be one of the most, in my opinion, terrifying figures in 40k, an unmatched swordsman whose pride and cruelty are legendary. But the way his stories get written, he rarely wins on his own merit. It's always tied to his curse or some contrived like twist. Instead of being a proper villain who earns his reputation blade in hand, he comes across as cheap or hollow, and that's the real shame, because when writers like Josh Reynolds get their hands on the Emperor's children, they feel vibrant, they feel dangerous, right, and twisted in a really compelling way. But most of the time, they're left as an afterthought, or worse, a punchline. And Lucius's tragedy isn't just his curse in the lore, it's kind of outside of the lore. The writers, they rarely let him be essentially what he's just meant to be. I'm going to kind of stop ranting now. That was my 2 cents. On paper, essentially, he should be terrifying. He's a prodigy with a blade, Fulgrim's golden boy, later a cursed immortal who can never truly die. He's Warhammer's answer to Ed Gein, a man who literally wears his victims, every scar carved into his face, every screaming soul bound into armour, every grotesque trophy as a reminder that you never really beat him. So I guess what we're left with is this like twisted double image. In theory, Lucius is the eternal like boogeyman, right? A killer you can't get rid of. In practice, he's often written as like a hollow version of himself, which in a way is perfect for Halloween. Once handsome, now hideous, once proud, now pitiful. A man so consumed by his own legend that even death won't take him. And that's where like the Gein parallel, I think, really lands, and we can conclude this video, because Ed Gein would never escape the grotesque little world that he built in that farmhouse. And Lucius is the same, only on like a cosmic scale. He isn't just cursed in the lore, he's cursed in the writing too, forever wearing the faces of others but never quite being allowed to wear his own. Oh, that was a chef's kiss, that was. Wow. Anyway, I'm only going to implore you one time to please do all those things you need to do to support my channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.